when you feel it in your bones and in your mind, that's how you know something's got to change.
When you lose everything in business, when you lose everything in life, when you lose people in life, it takes time for the healing. So what did you do to get started on that journey?
You don't have a one size fits all. Everyone then has a slightly unique situation or roadblocks or circumstances that they are struggling with. And that's where the coaching comes in. There's always more to optimize, but also being content with where we're at, because we don't want to be that person who's micromanaging every second in the calendar.
Welcome back for another episode of Better Business, Better Life. I'm your host, Debra Chantry-Taylor, and I'm passionate about helping entrepreneurs live their ideal lives by creating better businesses. I'm a certified EOS implementer, an FBA-accredited family business advisor, and a business owner myself with several business interests. I work with established business owners and their leadership teams to help them live their ideal entrepreneurial life using EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. Today's guest is a specialist, and he started martial arts at the age of 4 and was teaching by the age of 10. He lost all his motivation and went to a dark place before pulling himself out, and is now on a mission to create 10 million dads who lead by example. Today, he's going to share how you can create the right balance between work and life and use functional fitness to get more from your work and your life. Aidan Lee is a martial artist, transformational coach, speaker, and dad. Welcome to the show, Aidan. Great to have you here.
Great to be here, Deborah. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Now, we've been having a bit of a chat, as we always do, before the podcast, and you shared your story with me. I think it'd be really helpful if you could give a little bit of your story to the listeners.
Yeah, definitely. I'll try and keep it concise and go into more in the great nuance. So I was telling Deborah that I've been mostly in martial arts and fitness for the last 28 years or more, since I was 4. And I got my first step into that world from my late dad. So he actually ran one of the main martial arts schools in the area called Warlords Kickboxing Academy. So there I learned to not just only do martial arts, but from 4 years old. But by the time, I also didn't tell you, when I was 10, that's when I started teaching. So I was teaching in the classes, helping
At
out.
10 years old?
Yeah. Well, I was training most days, every day. So it was like natural, just became second nature. So I was very lucky to be in that environment. And also back then, it was a lot more hardcore, a bit more raw and real, but it taught me a lot about life and a lot of things which can relate back to business, about discipline, focus, resilience, channeling energy in the right direction, and so on. So those are really powerful lessons for me. And fast forwarding to later, I picked up, that was mostly doing kickboxing, but then I picked up boxing, Muay Thai, Wing Chun, and bits of other martial arts as well. But where really things came together for me is when I went to uni and I studied philosophy, and I thought, oh, I need to blend these two things together. But when I came out, my plan was always to become a world champion in kickboxing. So that was the professional fighting path I was going to go down. And then I realized afterwards, after training 2-3 times a day, 6 days a week, and making it about the competition, not about the process, not about just falling in love and just being a martial artist and being better physically, mentally and spiritually, I fell out of love with it. Ended up with lots of injuries, brain damage, even from too much hard sparring since I was a little kid. But, you live and learn. And ended up depressed, anxiety. I was bedbound for some time. So I went from being in like super fit fighting shape to being bedbound. It was quite a big change for me. And it took a few years to come out of that slump, shall we say. But afterwards I was like, all right, what shall I do next? And I didn't want to go work a normal job or do anything which was going to deplete me further. Nothing wrong with the normal job. But for me, being in that world my whole life, I couldn't see another path. So I thought, all right, let me see if I can help others after I pick myself back up on my feet to become fit and healthy. So I opened a small personal training studio. I did that for quite a few years. Then I realized something was missing, went back to my roots and opened up a martial arts school like my dad did. And then about 2 years ago, we stopped that because I realized when students were coming in, is that I wanted to give them a lot more, but because we were confined geographically to one area, but also I found I wanted them to grow physically, mentally and spiritually way more than if they wanted to just come in for, say, a kickboxing class. But there was about select 10, 20% of students who were really interested in that self-growth and that self-development. And tying this back to business, it's about people, right? It's about your own growth, which can then be tied to your own journey. So I realized, well, what can I do instead? And I'd recently become a father it's been about 4 years ago now, and onto my third one, hopefully next week. So busy times, but I thought, well, what do we need in society? And I was telling you this earlier, Deborah, that sometimes lots of parents would come in asking us to teach their children martial arts. And the main characteristic they wanted to develop in their child, or even themselves a lot of the times, was confidence or more energy, which then translated as confidence. But I realized these dads weren't leading by example themselves. So they were asking their kids or handing it off to someone like myself to make their kids more confident, but weren't willing to do the same themselves. So it was quite hard. And I found, actually, this is not really getting the transformation we wanted. We actually wanted to turn it into the martial arts school into a franchise, go national and so on. But because we were as far as we know, the only school which had our USP was like mixing martial arts and philosophy. Even for like the 2-3-year-olds, we had super basic mental growth lessons. So it was quite a unique thing in the martial arts world. But that's what made us stop and say, no, we need to help dads instead, because if we can help them, everything will trickle down to their children, to the local community, and then society thereafter.
Interesting. I'm going to go back a few steps if you don't mind, because I know that you said that when you realized that you'd lost the kind of the love and the desire to kind of do the big competitions and things, you got into a space where obviously you had some physical challenges, but also some mental challenges as well. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that? Because it feels like you would have lost your way, right? As in suddenly everything that you lived for had disappeared. And I've been through that when I had a business go into receivership, right? Because, you'd spent your entire life kind of building this thing up, and then all of a sudden it was no longer there, and it can have a massive impact on you. Would you mind sharing a little bit of that journey with us?
Of course, yeah. Please feel free to go deeper if I don't go so enough as well. But like you said, when you go into that kind of darkness, the abyss of bad and dark times, but you feel like you can't get out, that's where it really feels bad, and like there's no way out. So even for me now, personally, I'm not a big fan of these labels like depression and this and that. I think I was in that state of a depressive state, but being in a position where I could not move much, whereas before I could, move and jump and spin and do all sorts of fancy, cool moves, but then not being able to get out of bed without my joints aching and really not being able to do much. I remember one day I thought, all right, let me just test how weak or how strong I am. I had a, pull-up bar you can fit on the door. I used to have one of those at home. I thought, let me just see, what I can do. And I could barely just do one. And I know for some people who are fit or strong, that would be an achievement. But if you were able to do sets and sets of those repetitions after repetition, you realize, wow, I'm really, really weak. And when you feel it in your bones and in your mind, that's how you know something's got to change. So when that happened to me, that was quite a big realization, like, wow, I need to fix this. I can't let this go on any longer, because I would end up spending most of my days in bed trying to figure out how can I get my energy back. And, I think a lot of people experience, not to this level, but to some level, a lot of the guys I speak to, because like you, I work with a lot of business owners and dads who are business owners, they, trying to balance life as a father, life as a business owner. They're operating on 10, 20% when they've got another 80% left in the tank. So I felt like I was operating on 5 and I had 95 back to build. So, even an extra 5-10% can make a massive difference. So the main things I, shall we say, quote unquote, suffered with are like the depression, the anxiety. I had like red raw eczema. So I was like bleeding in the mornings when I woke up. So it's quite, not really, I wasn't dying, but it was bad enough for me. It was enough to be like, wow, I need to figure out how I can fix this. I had a bunch of gut issues and internal health issues. And whether you're the fittest person on earth or the everyday Joe, when you're not aligned, like physically, mentally, that when something is off, whether it's a small thing or a large amount, you need to fix that. And that's how I felt for a long time, and eventually came out the other side.
So what do you think was the trigger that kind of made you, because I mean, say, having been there and knowing the effect it can have on you, you can recognize what's going on, but you still have to make the decision to actually do something about it, right? Because it's a little bit like, I've struggled with weight a lot of my life. It's like, that you're overweight, there's usually something that makes you go, okay, now's the time. I'm actually going to take action rather than just talk about it. So was there a point that you got to, and what was that trigger point?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think as you realize as well, Deborah, you can have all the theory, all the potential knowledge, but until it transmutes into action, then what is the point? Was there one defining point? I would say there was more of like a series of different points. I don't know if I can share this kind of stuff, because one is a bit more alternative. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it. Yeah.
So I don't know how long ago it's now, maybe about 10 years ago, I did a ayahuasca ceremony. Do you know what that is?
Oh, yes, I do. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I did that, and that was one of the big turning moments for me. So I won't go into too much detail, but basically, for those who don't know, it's one of the most powerful natural psychedelics known to man. And the idea of it is that it can help you to go through your life in a way which helps you to fully understand what's happening and come out the other side. But when you come on the other side, you have to really do the work and implement the change. So the big visual for me, that change, was inside this experience. I could see myself inside this boxing ring. And then this life-size pair of scissors came in and chopped the ropes. And then when it did that, it like went into a puff. And that was the message to me saying, it's time to move on. Your time with this part of your journey is done. So for me, that was a really eye-opening moment.
Fantastic. I love it. I know that a lot of my friends have actually done that. I haven't done it myself, but I'm quite keen. I think it will be a very interesting experience to go through. I'm also a bit scared, if I'm really honest. You had that realization, which is great. And then obviously, I'm guessing it took some time. It's like, when you lose everything in business, when you lose everything in life, when you lose people in life, it takes time for the healing. It takes time for you to build up the muscles that you need to use to get back to it. So what did you do to get started on that journey? Because you said you could only do, one pull up when you used to be super fit. How did you start putting in place the ability to build mentally and physically to get back to where you needed to be?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at this, because a lot of these kind of stories of like someone coming back or something, I think there's a bit of a false perception that people think, oh, they came back and it was like 90 days later. And of course that can happen. But like you say, it tends to be more of like a process over years. And also for myself, I've been in, this martial arts fitness world my whole life. So theoretically I could have done it a lot sooner, but it actually took me years to get to that point, whereas from this rock bottom to more of an optimized position, that took a long time. But it was really about focusing on the basics and also on what I love. So for example, I don't like doing certain styles or types of training, but if I did that, then I knew it would have taken longer for me to do that. What I did was a couple of things. At that point, I was also vegan. So I'm not saying it can't work for anybody, but for me, it didn't work. I did it for 8 years. Towards the end of it, I was having some really, really bad health issues, which were in line with the things I was experiencing. So I dropped that. I eventually picked up my health massively as a result. I was able to have better gut health, mental clarity, build muscle easier. So that was a huge shift for me. So to relay this to a lesson to the listeners, it's like, find not just about nutrition, but the right elements you need to build the right response in your body. So for some, that'll be nutrition. Some will be dealing with stress, with hormones, optimizing testosterone, and so on. Whatever that is, you have to find the biggest levers, just like in business, that are holding you back from making the biggest gains with the least amount of work. So that was probably one of the biggest things for me. And then secondly was focusing on, all right, well, now I need to build my weight, my strength back up. So even though I'd done most of my life in more like martial arts stuff, I took a big educational turn into focusing on functional strength. I still kept the martial arts up, but I realized I needed a bit of a better foundation posturally, mechanically, and from a muscular point of view as well. So I focused on that. And then thirdly, I would say I really focused on my mental state. That was and I don't mean this in like a wishy-washy sense, like, oh, feel happy and content. No, I really tried to say, well, what did I learn from martial arts, from philosophy, and how can I intertwine those things in a way where I can really get better? Because even at that point, I was, especially on the tail end of it, I was still teaching others a little bit, but not in in the thick of the bad times. But on the tail end, I was starting the business. I thought, right, I've got to apply this stuff to myself in a deeper and a better and a more transformative way. So start reading more, understanding more of these concepts, and also just looking back at my life, saying, well, how was I able to train so hard and build so much, speed, athleticism, movement? I did that because I had a certain state of mind. So I wanted to make sure I went back to thinking and being like I was when I was in my prime.
Nice. Okay. And so you obviously use these tools now and you're helping other people who are stuck, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is where it's really important, is that you don't have a one size fits all, because everyone needs, especially in business, I think, as you know, of course, business principles are universal, but everyone then has a slightly unique situation or roadblocks or circumstances that they are struggling with. And that's where the coaching comes in. So, well, right, you need to eat right, sleep right, don't stress too much, train, go for a walk, get some sunlight, and so on and so forth. But what's stopping you from doing those things? And more often than not, of course, some people literally don't have the knowledge. And I would say, especially in this market, like the kind of people we work with, they're clever people. They're not, they look and research and they do stuff. A lot of people I work with, they actually know loads about health. And sometimes they surprise me with things that, I've not heard about that. Very interesting. So it's not that they don't know, but it's more about, well, how do we apply this in a tangible way to their lives?
And I think sometimes we tend to sort of overcomplicate it as well. I know certainly in business, but also in life as well, as that we take things and we really make them more difficult than they need to be. And so for me, it's always about coming back to the basics and going, how do we really simplify this down? And you're absolutely right. I mean, if you think about business, the framework that I use as EOS, there's nothing rocket science in there. Like most business owners know what they need to do. It's just about having a framework and simplifying it down so they can actually follow it. And I think having somebody who can actually hold them accountable as well. So having a coach that is there to bring them on that journey. So I always liken it to building a house. We need to lay the foundations. We put up the framework, which is the EOS model, how you want to decorate it, what works for you in that house, what fittings and fixtures you need. That's all very, very different based on the business and the business owner. But the foundations and the framework need to be there for you to do that well.
Exactly. No, that's a great analogy. That's it. And if you don't have those foundations, all the biohacking, the supplements and whatever for health, and same for business, the shiny new marketing tactic or something, it doesn't matter, right?
Okay, so let's explore a little bit about the work that you do. So you work a lot with dads who are business people. What do they come to you for? What's usually the biggest challenge when somebody comes to you, do you think? What's the normal?
Yeah, there's a couple which I say really, really come up. One is the work-life balance, in terms of usually they're too zoned in on the business in a way where it's not just detrimental to family life, but also they realize that their performance is not as high as it could be. So how would you summarize that in a word or two? Well, it's like productivity, brilliant energy, or focused energy. So that's from a work / potential point of view. I'll say that's the main thing. And then personally, that they don't feel like they're being an example to their kids, whether they've got young kids like myself or older kids, because it doesn't matter whether kids are 18, 20, 30, you still want to be a person to them that they can look up to throughout the whole of their lives. So it's also about being an example. And then also sometimes with their wives, usually, that because they focus so much on the business and neglected their health, then, as a connection, not just intimately, sometimes intimately too, but also as a connection that has, because they focus so much on business, they've left the kids, the wife, to just focus on themselves. And it's not as integrated as they would like. But the initial surface level things, definitely the energy, productivity, performance, and then the other things tend to go from there.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first started putting this podcast together, I think it's almost 3 years ago now. One of the things was I recognized that the people that I were working with, they were often, obviously very, very passionate about the business and so engrossed in the business that they had, from the outside looking in, it looked like they had it all because they had a good business and making good money. They had the house, the toys, the car, all that kind of stuff. But in reality, yes, there was that missing. And I always struggle with the word balance because it makes me feel like it should be absolutely equal. But it's really about balance, is about making sure what's right for you. So are you spending enough time with the people you love? Are you spending enough time doing the things you're passionate about? And I realized that, so looking from the outside in, they might look fantastic, but in reality, they lost that ability to connect with their children, connect with their wife, and look after their health. Because I think the health is one of the first things that tends to go. I think for most people, if you're really, really engrossed in your work, because you're trying to balance all these different things, the health is the easiest one to let go.
Yeah, 100%. And, to be honest, I've even, ironically, and just being honest, is I've even said, oh, I'll train tomorrow or I'll do that tomorrow, but I know I don't really do it anymore, but I have done that especially when I first started business, because I was inexperienced. I didn't know, I was overwhelmed and so on and so forth. And I think even if you're mid to higher size business, the pressure gets higher, the responsibilities are higher. So naturally, I think people, even if they don't plan to and they've got that business experience, sometimes they go back to their almost like early business days in terms of how they treat things. And they just go, I've got to go all in on business and nothing else can happen until our revenue has hit a certain point, until I've got enough team members, or until I can delegate this. But I think the key belief that people need to shift is that if you can optimize your own health and even just get an extra 5-10% out of yourself in terms of productivity, that will translate into more money, more time off, more presence. And like you say about the balance, it's not that it has to be 50-50. No, it's if you're going to spend an hour in the evening with your kids and then an hour with your wife, or an hour altogether, whatever, be fully present in the hour and make the most of it, because that's way more worth than 10 hours of checking your phone every 5 minutes for a different email or going backwards and forwards. Just, be present is the main thing.
Be happy. But it's interesting because I did a lot of leadership coaching. We talked about that. There's the hamster wheel, right? The hamster wheel is where you're always going, well, when I get to this, when I get to this, when I get to this, it's like, what about just actually recognizing where you are at now? And I think Dan Sullivan talked about this in one of his books, where he talks about always measuring backwards. So rather than just be chasing the next thing, is kind of go, well, where am I now? And how does that compare to where I was 12 months ago? And therefore measuring the progress you've made rather than chasing the next big thing that, whatever that is. And he talked about in his book, this guy who was a business owner who he was like, I'm going to be happy when I make $1 million, and I'm going to be happy when I make $2 million. And every time he hit his goal, he wasn't happy until he had like the next one. So when I make $15 million, and he actually ended up dying and didn't sort of achieve his goal, which meant that he was never actually happy. So there is some merit in sort of looking at, okay, how do you become happy with where you are right now? How do you become present and enjoy what you're doing now?
Wow. Is that a true story? That's amazing.
It's a true story. Yeah.
Even if it wasn't just as a parable, it's so telling, is that carrot is dangled in front of you, but it's up to you whether you keep chasing it. Of course, you should aim higher and increase the revenue and profit margins and blah, blah, blah. But if it's at the detriment of the quality of your life, then you've got to ask, well, what are you building this business for? Is it to just purely for money? Because we all know money is only a means to an end. But if you're helping others, making an impact, you're healthy and you're making money, like, why not? You can have it all. I think that's the thing as well. So have it all. Why not have everything rather than just one or two things?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so somebody's sitting here and thinking, you know what, I have let my health go a bit, and I probably am not being as good a father or mother as I possibly could be. Where would be the first place you would get them to start? Because having the recognition is one thing, doing something about it is quite different.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what I usually do with all my students is a couple of assessments, because it's very irresponsible of me to say, oh, cool, go and do this, go and do that. But also on the student or client's part is to say, go and do this, but without any benchmarks. So a couple of things, and I'll turn this into something actionable for people in a moment. But initially for myself with students is a biomechanics assessment. So biomechanics is just a fancy word for your movement patterns, so how you move. And there's like 4 key movements to analyze. So it's one, standing, like I'm doing that. It's how you walk, how you run, and then how you throw. So those are the 4 key fundamental human movements. And if you do those 4 things well, for example, you stand and you're not like this, and you can sprint, and you can sprint more than 10 meters without pulling a muscle or pulling it back, then, you're doing all right. But jokes aside, like what we do is we analyze this with videos. So I ask them to take videos of their form and movements. And this gives me the data. I know, all right, well, your posture is like this and you're really tight here in your pec minor, for example, and that's causing you to have shortness of breath and so on and so forth. So you see there's actually a lot of downstream effects from having the wrong base. Like you said earlier about the house, you could have a house. We all have our one and only house, our body. But if it exists in poor form, then it's a really bad thing for me to tell you, oh, go and do this exercise without fixing the base. And that's what a lot of people do. Hence why you can see from my build, I'm not massive. That's not my style. Bruce Lee is more my influence, those kind of figures. But if you build on bad foundations, like if you see a bodybuilder who's got really bad posture, but they look massive and muscular, sure, it might look good if that's what you're going for. But from a functionality perspective, for example, can your average huge bodybuilder scratch their back? They can't. They sound silly, but they can't do that. So you need to have a balance where you're actually moving well, like our ancestors did thousands of years ago. We should be saying, well, my benchmark is my great 100 generations ago granddad who could sprint after some prey and catch it with a bow and arrow or a spear. That's it. That's what I'm looking for. So, could I not literally do that, but could I run and keep up with them and do that kind of stuff?
Okay. I was interested when you said stand, walk, run and throw. I was thinking exactly, it's caveman behavior, right? That's where we actually came from. That is functional fitness, right? That is what's going to keep us healthy going forward. Okay. So you analyze, you have a look at that, you analyze that. But that's what you're doing to help them set some benchmarks. What do they need to do to get themselves in the right position, I suppose, to be able to make changes?
Yeah, so I should have added to that as well. So that's the biomechanics. Then we do things like lifestyle and environment assessment. So, for example, it's like even things like what bedding do they use, what lights are in their house, what water do they drink, all these things. They have especially in the modern house and lifestyle, they all have a toxic load. So we have to think, all right, how can we reduce the things which are interfering with their hormones to optimize them to the highest degree? And of course, we look at nutrition and fitness and so on. But after this, it's like, all right, well, can we get you to do our baseline fitness training? And what would you get from this? And this is a bad example, but just something that everyone would know. It's like, well, how many press ups can you do? Oh, you can do 5. All right. Well, okay, I know where you're at. How many squats can you do? And so on. So we look at these other benchmarks and build from there. So in terms of then, what can we actually get going? Well, I don't want to get too technical, but after we've got all of that data, we build a simple system. And I like to recommend, especially for business owners, that you train for 30 minutes a day. It's not too long. I think even the busiest of people could say, all right, I can do 30 minutes. If they really want to, they'll find a way. It's not like saying, oh, you need to do hours, because that's the wrong mentality. Most people have this idea. They have to train like a bodybuilder for hours a day. It's like, you don't. Really, I recommend 30 minutes a day, 6 days, take 1 day off, alternate the training. So 1 day is functional strength. The next day is like, I usually teach the kickboxing on the other days. So something like that. So functional strength, kickboxing, or some other form of cardio, like good running, sprinting, hill sprints, or whatever it is, depending on the person. And then you alternate basically for the 6 days, have 1 day off. But the key difference is, it's not just what you're doing in that half an hour. It's what you're doing in the other 23 and a half that really builds the body. Like one of my students, Jamie, he just recently wrapped up with me. He dropped about 30 pounds in 12 weeks. And it's not that he was like super intelligent or did something really amazing. What he did is just follow the system, did the work, and got the result. Asked for feedback, went backwards and forwards. We kept it really simple. And if you can follow a basic system like that I've just outlined, can you commit to training for 30 minutes a day? Can you go for a walk at least once a day, if not a bit more? And many other various habits, which if you want some more, let me know, I can go into them. And if you can get these key habits down, then it's almost impossible, whether you've got weight to lose or you want to build muscle, whatever your goal is, or more energy, it's almost impossible to not. Because I think, just to wrap this part up, is that most people in one lifestyle, unless they are fit and healthy and they're doing all these things I'm talking about, their lifestyles are so far from natural that it doesn't take much to get the desired result if we just change a few key things.
Yeah, I heard you talk about the environment in our home, and I've done a lot of work with a naturopathic doctor who's very much into that, in the effect of natural light, and then of course the effect of unnatural light on our hormones and what that has on us. And we live in a society now where there is just so much stuff going on that is so unnatural, isn't it?
Oh, massively. I've got some lights on me and stuff. And for me, this is really unusual. We usually have I don't know if you've done this as well. If you worked with someone like that, we usually have red light, all the bulbs in our house are red lights. For the podcast, I wouldn't do that to you, but
Yeah, that's cool. No, we did. We went through our whole house and turned them all into hue lights because they could actually change the colours of them, which means they go obviously red at night time. But also, I think one of the things I learnt, which was quite fascinating, was about the overhead lights. So most modern homes have got down lights everywhere, right? Which is beautiful from a lighting point of view. Not so great from a body point of view because it actually tells the body that we're in the middle of the day when in actual fact it's nighttime. So we actually have a rule where we try, not so we do it every single day, but we try really hard to actually make sure after 5 or 6 p.m. we actually don't have any overhead lights on. We use side lights, we use table lights, things to actually try and mimic more of a natural environment. I also know it's really important to go out for a walk first thing in the morning, get sunlight first thing in the morning. So there's so much that we have forgotten about because of our modern lifestyle.
100%. It's great you've got all that in place already, Deborah, because most people don't have that, or even if they have the idea of it, like it seems really, really simple to change your light bulbs, but it's quite a big resistance for most people. Even some students might say, "Oh, it's a good idea to change your light bulbs." Or like you say, don't focus on these lights up here. Get a few lamps, and as you say, you want to get that as close to fire as possible, especially in the evenings, because you need to wind down. And a lot of business owners, I realize, they're always, especially at night time, checking emails on the phone and so on and so forth. And, sure, we've all been guilty of it, but there are some ways to mitigate this, but two, it's more about habit change, like anything, than about the actual tactics. Of course, the tactics do matter, but they need to be tied with pure, not hardcore, but like religiously abided to habit change. Not just, I'll do it for 5 days, see how it goes. No, especially with things like light balance and stuff, it takes some time.
Yeah, absolutely. And there definitely are some great technologies out there that can help you, even if you do want to check your email. But you're right, the best thing you can do is actually have a true switch off period where you kind of go, right, this is actually my relaxed wind down time. Also my family time and time spent around. We used to do it around the fire, right? When we were cavemen, we'd all sit around the fire and have that family time together. So I remember that. Okay, so people listening in, I always ask for 3 top tips or tools that they can, sort of take away, things that could actually make a fundamental difference. What would be your 3 top tips or tools, Aidan?
Definitely. Well, number one is quite a unconventional way of looking at it, but number one thing I recommend to people, it can even help you lose weight and fat because it helps to drain the lymph system, help the body to get nutrients to where it needs to be in the right times, the right places, is to do a practice called, the acronym is MFR, which stands for myofascial release. And it's really the simple way of looking at it is just self-massage. I switched from stretching, and bearing in mind I was in traditional martial arts. So I spent a good 15 plus years trying to do the splits and all these kinds of things. Now I don't stretch at all. I don't believe in stretching. I don't think it's good for you, but that's another story. So instead, everyone thinks they need to stretch, but what you just need to do is just do some simple massage. You just need a tennis ball or a hockey ball. And obviously you place it on the areas where the tightness or your posture is dysfunctional. And then you put as much pressure on it as possible in various positions, and that will help you to release the position. Because this leads on to a framework which I use, is basically you need to release the area. For example, as I said earlier about the tight posture, if I've got this roundness here, I need to release that. Great, it's released. Okay, now I need to strengthen or retension, which is basically strengthening. So now I strengthen in this area, because again, if I'm doing some bench press like this, but I'm sitting like this, well, actually that's only going to make that area tighter, and it's going to make it round even more at the chest. So actually you want to release, retension, and then reintegrate at the last stage. That means the body and structure is more aligned, and it's basically aligned as it should be. So that's the first thing I would recommend, is doing myofascial release. Second thing.
Actually, that's really painful too. I've tried that. That can be really painful.
Do you do it with a tennis ball?
But helpful. Yeah. And also with rollers and things as well. So yeah.
Oh, nice. If you can hack it, I'd recommend to get a hockey ball or a lacrosse ball, one or the other.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it's a lot harder. Yeah. I think there's a bit of a lag. I'll go on to tip number 2. So after you do MFR, the second thing I recommend is find a practice or a style of training that you really love. Now, for me, the balance, and what I teach to my students, is the balance between functional strength training and martial arts. The reason is, or kickboxing specifically, the martial arts kickboxing side is a skill. Most people get bored of training and exercise because there's no skill development. There's nothing to look forward to. This is why the belt system in martial arts worked really well. So, I want to go from white belt all the way to black belt. Whether or not, it means much to have a belt, that's another story. But mentally, there is a progression that you can see and visualize, and you've acquired skills along the way to help you demonstrate that. And at the same time, you're getting massively fit. And as a bonus, two birds with one stone, you're able to defend yourself. So one quote I like to, I might be hacking at it, but I'll just paraphrase. I don't know if you've heard of this book. It's called The Book of Five Rings by a samurai called Miyamoto Musashi. He was the most famous samurai, but he basically says, once you see the way, and he's talking about the way in terms of Taoism and the Eastern way of looking at how the universal order of things comes together. So he says, once you see the way, you'll see it in all things. And he's referring to martial arts. Martial arts is a great way or path to help you understand yourself, other people, and also the world around you. So he's saying, once you see the way, you'll see it in all things. Hence why there's books like The Art of War by Sun Tzu that loads of people in business use, because why? It helps you to see the way in others. So I know I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but that would be the second thing is find something that you love, a skill that's going to keep you going and you can see yourself doing for the rest of your life. And lastly, third thing, there's so many more, but I'll tie it down to this one thing, is I also teach which kind of ties into what I just said there, especially the martial arts philosophy as part of our program. So again, one of the other unique things we do is that, because I feel it's very connected to martial arts, but two, I know a lot of people in business do read and they do educate and stuff, but a lot of the dads sometimes I work with, they struggle obviously to fit some time in just to do some exercise and training, let alone be able to read 10 pages a day. So if one habit I try and build into people is, how can you read for 10 pages a day? It could be you listen to an audiobook. It could be you actually physically read it, which is great. But the commute somewhere else, you can definitely listen to 10 pages at least, especially on two times speed, more than possible.
Yes. Man after my own heart. I love the 2 times speed. And I suppose, you can do that when you're going for your walk. You can do it when you're commuting into work. There's many different places you can actually just listen to something if you can't physically sit down and read a book.
Exactly. And I think as long as we have this state of mind that there's always more to optimize, but also being content with where we're at, because we don't want to be that person who's micromanaging every second in the calendar. But I also get the principle of that too. It's just, do you have a healthy relationship with that? And are you tying it back to yourself, where you say, well, all right, I'm looking after myself. Everything's optimized. My health is optimized, my family, my lifestyle. And as a result, my business is doing great too.
And we ask people to do it in business. We talk about, setting your rocks for your quarter and making sure you actually book time out in your diary to do it. Because if you don't book time out in your diary, you won't do it. And I always show people my diary, my personal diary. And I say the same thing happens to your personal stuff too. If you don't actually make the time for the things that are important. So I do have a personal trainer 3 times a week. It's in my calendar. That's not negotiable. I have time for my reading. I have time for, I actually have a bedtime in my calendar that says I am due to be winding down to go to bed at 8:30. And people laugh at that. And it doesn't mean that I do it all the time. I can make a decision. I can actually say, you might invite me out for a drink, and I'll go, okay, just this once, I'll go and do that. But if it's not in your calendar, if it's not part of your routine, it's just too easy to not do it. And so, by putting it in there and making the time means you've got the ability to make the decision whether or not you want to do it, but at least you've got the time to do it.
100%. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, and it's good you're practicing this stuff, because it shows it can be done. And it's not, I think a lot of people also think that when you schedule to this kind of level, like I also have bedtime in my calendar too. And I think it's useful. Yeah, honestly, it's useful. And sometimes, you get so wrapped up in what you're doing that, or, even if you're just relaxing, that you do forget that, actually I should be doing this now, because it's also about a little bit of delayed gratification. Is that if I do stick to this, then, tomorrow I won't suffer, or I'll get off to a better start tomorrow. So a lot of people forget that, especially when it comes to health, nutrition, training, and business, is that oh, I'll exercise tomorrow, I'll train tomorrow. But really, every time you put it off, you're reinforcing the signal that it's okay to do that, that's a standard that you've accepted, that is a standard that you're willing to share with your employees, your team, your children, your wife, and so on. You know, if your employee was having a problem and they were super unhealthy and you knew that was affecting their work and their life, you would probably advise them to go look after themselves, take some time out.
Yeah. And we talked about this right in the beginning. It's like, that to be a good leader, you actually have to lead. You have to lead by example, whether that be as a father, as a business owner. You need to actually lead by example. So the boundaries, I talk about boundaries a lot, and I think boundaries are really important. It's like if you have the boundaries in place, people know what to expect. If you let those boundaries slip, you suddenly have new boundaries.
Exactly. Yeah. And they almost become boundless.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so the three things. So the MFR, myofascial release, practice your style of training that works for you. I think that's really important, and something that you can actually learn and improve in as well, so that you've actually got some motivation to continue. And then find time to read or listen to 10 pages a day so that you actually have the ability to keep learning as you grow.
Yeah, that's it.
Brilliant. Hey, look, Aidan, been lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much. I know it's late over there in the UK, and I appreciate you not having red light on the podcast, because it makes for a better viewing when people are watching it online. If people want to get in contact with you, what's the best web address for them?
Yeah, at the moment, I'm focusing on delivering a newsletter every Monday. It's less than 5 minutes or less. And it's basically lessons which help you to build a warrior's physique and lead your family by example. So if you go to FitRoots, which is what I'm wearing now, fitroots.uk/newsletter, that's where you can join and take a look.
Excellent. I should do that myself as well. Hey, look, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you, Deborah. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Aidan.